A couple of years ago, I read the book by Catherine Belton. It's called Putin's People in English, right? Is I
Yes.
have the German edition, I have the English edition. So
Yeah,
I
it's a
read
very
this
interesting book. Yeah.
very interesting book. So I read this whole thing, and then I noticed this one thing that I didn't expect. I was expecting, all this great inside info of, you know, Russian money flowing into the city of London and all this appeasement and all this craziness. So I was expecting that. But then she tells a story, Catherine Belton does. She says that one of her sources, a high-placed person, banking industry, that source told her the following. The source says, well, there is this, now was, because she's now dead, there was this Russian princess. She's called Princess Tatiana Hilarionovna, and she's also related, or she comes from the Vasilchikov family, an old established Russian Tsar, pro-Tsar family. And Princess Tatiana, Princess Tatiana had lived in Hessen, Germany, meaning the West, so not the communist part of Germany. She lived in this castle in Hessen, and she had married Paul from the Metternich clan. this very old Austrian, partially German family. Metternich, and you mentioned before. Clemens, I think it was Clemens Wenzel von Metternich, the famous international, statesman.
The nemesis of Napoleon, yes.
Exactly. And so, this was Princess Tatiana. She had grown up in, the old Russia, and her family was then evacuated first to Crimea, and then the British king, actually, I think it was George V, the British king has them picked up, and also somebody from the Romanov family. So Tatiana's family was very old, and Tatiana's family was close to the Romanovs. So they get evacuated from Crimea, and she ends up in this castle in Hessen. And then we are told in this Catherine Belton book, we are told that the source explains that Tatiana, in her castle in Hessen, she got a visitor, and that visitor was none other than Vladimir Putin, a younger Vladimir Putin. Now we know
and
that
this would be what, around 1985, 86?
Five-ish, as it was either 85. It was either 85 to 89, because that's what the foreign posting was.
That's when of course Putin was working in the Dresden KGB in liaison with the Stasi.
Exactly. Yeah. So people have to remember the German border. That was, Hessen is right next to the Soviet German state. So it would have been as simple for Putin, it would have been very simple. Get into a car, drive up to the German border, then sneak over the border, and with false papers and everything, make your way to that castle in Hessen to talk to Tatiana von Metternich.
And what on earth would a KGB man like Lieutenant Colonel Putin have to talk to a Russian princess about?
So
what would he be talking to her about?
So this was either the height of the Cold War in the 80s, or maybe it was earlier. I mean, the foreign posting of Putin started in 85, but he was in training and other things before that. So it's not given in the book by Belton what year it was, but. So Putin,
and of course Putin is a fluent German speaker, as we know. Famously.
Exactly, his German is pretty good. I mean, he spoke German in a speech at the Bundestag in the parliament in, I think, the year 2000. So he can have false papers, everything. He drives to the German border, hops over the border, meets up with this Russian born Princess Tatiana, who married into the Metternich clan. Okay. What would they talk about? Now, the first thing you have to remember is Princess Tatiana was one of the most connected people you can imagine. She was not just connected to exiled Russians, the emigres. She was deeply connected to German aristocrats. She was deeply connected to the British aristocracy, actually the British throne. She was connected to the ruling family of Denmark. She was connected to the Mountbattens, everything. We know about Lord Louis Mountbatten and how, close he was to the Soviet Union. And so Tatiana also knew these right-wing German guys and, politicians and industrialists, like the Oetker clan, right?
And she was pretty right-wing herself, wasn't she?
Well, she explains this in her books, and I read them today, and I was just amazed, right? So she explains it like this: she hated the Nazi leadership. She thought the Nazi leadership was a bunch of psychos and weirdos and dwarves and all that.
Pretty much.
But yeah, that was a fitting description. But she liked many German conservatives, and she married one. She married one of them. Paul von Metternich, who was active in the military. And
it's by the way, the Metternichs are a family that have been very much Anglophiles. They love the British. They love the British traditions, political traditions, and were the chiefs of the conservative, people in Austria, and so that family has this tradition of conservatism.
There's an episode when right at the end, or right when World War II was over, Germany was collapsing, everything was in chaos, the Red Army was approaching, it was a total mess. Of course, Princess Tatiana, the Russian-born princess, and her husband, von Metternich, they had to escape to save territory. Now, the Russians were after them. Some of the Germans were after them because I think Paul was connected to the assassination plot against Hitler. And so Tatiana and Paul, they get help from the Americans. And the Americans tell them where to go, where to escape. And so they go from castle to castle because, of course, they have these connections, right? So eventually they make it to Bavaria, and they stay for a while at the castle of the House of Hohenlohe, right? So they're greeted by this aristocrat who was Paul's former commander, a short while back. So they're greeted by this aristocratic guy, the House of Hohenlohe, and this guy's wife. She is directly related to the to the highest levels of Britain. She's related to the Romanovs. She's related to the House of the House of Hessen and all that stuff. So they went from
tell us
castle to castle.
what do you think Putin had to say to her? Why would Putin be talking to her, and what did you learn about her beliefs that might indicate what that was about?
So she not only made that distinction between the bad Nazis and the good German conservatives, she also made a similar distinction when it came to the Russians. So she said that the communist leadership was just terrible and horrible, and she hated the communist leadership. But she was convinced that Princess Tatiana was convinced there was this underground in Russia, and the secret underground in Russia. She explains this very thoroughly in her book. This was her memoirs, and there's other books. So she was convinced that the communists had not been able to really change the soul of Russia and the soul of the Russians, right?
Oh dear.
So they tried to destroy the Orthodox Church. They tried to re-educate people, blah, blah, blah. And you have to remember, a lot of the white Russian families, like herself, Tatiana, the Vasilchikov family, those were the white Russians.
And they were very often very religious, the women particularly, very religious.
in the Russian Civil War, a lot of these white Russians became red, the red Russians, communists, because they felt there was no other way. They didn't like communism, she explains, but these whites had to pretend to be communists, and a lot of these whites were not purged, in the later decades. These families, these originally white families, continued to exist. And so she alleges, and she may have believed it, she alleges there was this secret conservative Christian underground in Russia, right? So this is what she tells people.
And so where did she get this idea? Could she have gotten it from her visitor, Mr. Putin?
Well,
who's known to carry a cross and claim to be a Christian secretly?
Yeah, I mean, and there's another little thing I need to mention before I get into what Putin probably told her. Tatiana and her husband, they had business activities. So, for example, they had a winery and they were cooperating with the I think it was the Henkel and Söhne company, and they had a joint venture with the Oetker Group. These were billionaires. Eventually, the Oetkers became billionaires in Western Germany, and they made pudding mix and frozen pizzas and all that stuff, right? But there was a dark side to the Oetkers, of course, because the Oetker family, they had been one of the most privileged families in Nazi Germany. They made pudding mix for the German soldiers, and I think also ammunition. So it was a pretty dark family, and so.
So they're still making pudding, though, right?
make some nice pudding,
a political
nice pudding,
pudding.
and nice pudding and nice frozen
Russia's
pizza.
being taken over by Christians. That's quite a pudding.
And so this Oetker guy that Princess Tatiana was working with, and I think the Oetkers eventually, owned Tatiana's champagne business or something. I mean, people remember the commercials on German television. This was on all the time. The Metternich champagne, or as we call it, sect, right? This was a popular product. Everybody could buy this Metternich branded,
Did Ribbentrop ever sell it?
No.
As he was a champagne salesman before he was a Nazi leader.
There were some more champagne salesmen in Germany, in Nazi Germany. And so this Oetker guy, he was entangled in this Oetker guy was entangled in a secret organization which was called Stille Hilfe. That means silent help. And this organization was smuggling high-ranking Nazis out of the country. I mean, some of the most famous names. They were smuggling them out of the country. And they were also helping more Nazis to get a lesser sentence for crimes, or to get them, acquitted of any crimes. And so this was a very dark organization that Mr. Oetker was involved in. And Oetker was not.
They were smuggling the Nazis to Argentina, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so Oetker,
and along with all the Nazis in Argentina under Soviet control, because of
Tatiana was tied to this industrialist, the pizza and pudding guy Oetker, and Oetker was also working for this secret organization. Oetker was also working with another princess from Hessen. Okay, so Tatiana believes, or pretends to believe, there was this secret underground in Russia, that it's always been there, that it's growing in Russia. These people are not really communists. They're white Russians.
Where have we heard this before?
They love, this Operation Trust all over again. And these guys, they really like the old Russia, and they want to bring back the old Russia. So this is what Tatiana either believed or pretended to believe. So then, with all her connections, you have to imagine these industrialists like Oetker, they were always donating money to politicians, conservative politicians. And there were more industrialists like this, and so this was tied to politics, right? So Tatiana was either, maybe Tatiana was infiltrating the right wing in Germany, Western Germany, or she was fooled by this fake underground. So then comes Putin, right? The secret visit,
Tatiana meets Volodya.
And so Putin gets, was probably already stationed in Dresden. He gets into his car, drives to the German border, gets over the border, and with false papers, he can speak German. He goes to this castle in Hessen, talks to Tatiana. Now, there has been rumors or some, significant rumors that Putin himself may have had some aristocratic ancestors. Now, there was a clan called Putiatin, which was very old in Russia, and it was happily collaborating with the Romanovs. And so this back in those days, when there was an illegitimate child, then the last name of that illegitimate child was often shortened by a syllable. So Putiatin would become Putin. Now, none of this is really confirmed, so we don't know if Putin really has some aristocratic blood or if he just wanted to create this impression. But so when he visits Tatiana, Putin was really in the perfect position to sell that phony idea of a secret underground in Russia. Now, maybe
since
Tatiana
he likes to wear that cross and
maybe Tatiana
and
was
hint to
already
people, yeah.
Maybe Tatiana was already in on the scam. Maybe she was fooled by Putin, but this was probably Putin's approach while talking to her. Hey, listen, I am formally a communist. I've work for the KGB, but I really hate communism. I'm a Christian, and there's an underground in Russia. And I didn't tell my KGB colleagues that I would be making this visit. So you have to be cautious about who you tell about this visit. And so I'm trying to talk to you because of this underground in Russia, and you have all these connections, Princess Tatiana, so you could help us out. So we could get you information from inside Russia, and you could maybe get us some information flowing towards Russia. And also, as I said, Tatiana was connected to the Oetker family, and they were helping former Nazis. So if this whole Oetker operation was infiltrated by Soviet intelligence, this would be a nightmare. And this would actually explain why the conservative party the conservative party in Germany became more and more pro-Russia, especially after 1991, and especially when Putin came to power. Because why would this conservative party in Germany that was so pro-America all this time during the Cold War, why would this party push the career of Angela Merkel, who grew up in the East under communism? Why would they do that? This would explain a lot, why
Sure.
why all of this happened. So and then, of course, when Putin became head of state, some people not only believed he was in the West, some people not only believed that Putin was really a conservative and a Christian, but some people probably believed that Putin had been part of the secret underground working to destroy communism. So some people were probably thanking Putin for destroying communism. And so when you're talking about somebody like Tatiana von Metternich, she was connected to so many people in the West, and this is probably how this idea was spreading of that phony this idea was spreading about this Russian underground. And this
is where you get these idea of phony changes
and this is
in the
probably,
Soviet Union and phony changes in other communist countries. We have these stories. There's a Cuban version of this. There's the Romanian version. There's the Chinese, of course. The people forget that the crackdown at Tiananmen Square began because there was a democracy movement in China, and people thought, "Oh, China's going to democratize."
Yeah, and this is maybe how this lie of a secret underground. This is probably how this lie spread, not just in Western Germany, but also in Britain, because Tatiana was so connected to Britain. And then this idea probably spread to the United States as well, because nowadays we see guys like General Flynn and many others, and they started to believe in Putin. They started to believe in this supposed change in Russia.
Yes.
This is, I mean, this would have been the perfect way of selling the lie and drowning out, you know, the just completely or almost completely just drowning out the voices of the warnings of Golitsyn and Angleton and you know and some of these others, you know, because it was the perfect way to sell this, you know, by and imagine if this had reached Americans, influential Americans, right wingers, conservatives. They probably heard this multiple times from influential people, so they thought this was coming. This information was coming from all directions, so it's probably true.